So welcome to Mutale Nkonde. Very happy to have you here today for the second episode of our podcast on AI and decolonization. So you have a BSc honors in sociology from Leeds and a master's degree in American Studies from Columbia with fellowships at Notre Dame and Stanford. And you write for Slate and MS Magazine. And notably, you founded AI for the People in 2020, which I think is really cool because it's really great to be talking to someone who is involved in policy, I think, in this area, right? There's a lot going on in academia. I think a lot of it remains in academia. Yeah, so this is a really cool opportunity. Also, I forgot to say congratulations. I understand you just accepted for a PhD at Cambridge.
So I just started.
Very cool. Oh, brilliant. Okay, yeah. That must be amazing. Yeah, that's right. I remember you were saying you were at the Freshers Week last week. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
How'd that go? I hope it wasn't too.
It was wild. I have been in elite academic spaces, mostly in the US, but just getting used to the college system and how that relates to the department, and then being like, oh my God, I'm at Cambridge, and then looking at people and wondering, who's going to be the next ruler of the world? Who's evil? Who's good? Who's,
Nice. Yeah. Did you see the future Boris Johnson? Did you identify the future Boris Johnson?
I didn't yet, but I did. Cameron? I did join the Cambridge Union, and so I am pretty sure that the next generation of AI barons will be among me, and I'm hoping that I can encourage them to engage in what I think you and I are very passionate about: decolonial approaches to technology and ultimately our economy. So I am pretty sure that I was amongst the evil when I was there. I'm pretty sure.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, because of course one of the things that we'll get back to this, I think, but sort of whether AI sort of simply how do you say, whether it simply reproduces our evil tendencies, or perhaps even whether it even makes them worse. I'm not, and I don't think you are, but correct me if I'm wrong, one of those people who are sort of particularly interested in this idea of AI as the doom and gloom thing in the medium or long term. But clearly there are many more and very sort of real ways in which AI has very damaging effects on our societies.
I think we're definitely agreed. Ultimately, I run, and I know we're going to speak about this, but I started AI for the People, which is an affirmative statement. I was very intentional with our name, because we do believe that, first of all, we're lovers of science, and we do believe that scientific endeavor and scientific discovery can be a net public good, and the benefits of that, and I think this is our theoretical persuasion, is that the benefits of that can be shared equally across society and ultimately across the globe. I also think I'm at Cambridge. I'm speaking to you at King's. I already like you. You'd know you get my humor. But there are people in our educational class who also just see it as a way of wealth creation. And I kind of sit at let's try and get the maximum benefit for the maximum people. And let's anticipate potentially less returns, but for a greater positive impact. And that's controversial. Yeah. I don't think it's controversial, but it is a controversial position to take.
I think that also speaks, right, to something that I always say, and I think actually I also said this in the last episode of this podcast, right, that this is a political question also, right? And there needs to be political solutions in order to actually have these benefits of AI and other technologies, right?
Right.
That we've had historically. So I think on that note, I'd like you to maybe speak a little bit more about specifically AI for the people and some of the measures that you have been taking, your work on policy, you work with some Congress people in the US, et cetera, et cetera. If you could go into that, that would be really cool.
Yeah, sure. So, again, I'm Mutale. I am thrilled to be here, especially since I have spent the last 20 years in the US, and I'm now going to be active in the UK kind of AI conversations, both on the academic side and I'm hoping on the policy side also. AI for the People was originally just a project. I had written a report with two colleagues, Jesse Daniels, who is at the City University of New York and wrote Cyber Racism, which was a book in 2009 that really opened this idea in the academy that ideological positions could be advanced on digital technologies. And she was writing specifically about how the KKK here in the US, who are a white supremacist paramilitary group, were the first group of users of what we think of as a social internet. So they were taking their newsletters and they were digitizing. And this is somewhere around 1983. So if we think about Black Lives Matter as being something that we hold in the public conversation as a political use of certainly social media, this had all happened 40 years prior. And her and I co-authored with another colleague of ours, Derek Shin-Mayer, who's a computer scientist at Bucknell, a report called Advancing Racial Literacy in Tech. And it came from my prior experiences in the tech industry where I was watching products being developed, and there was no question about the ways in which race and racism were being reproduced. But as we were testing and evaluating in labs, all of these horrifically racist outputs were being shown. And one of the most famous was Google Picture. It was in beta. It was before it was Google Image. And there was a picture of two young Black people, and they were labeled as gorillas. And anybody who has worked in the product world knows that even though we automate processes, and at that time we weren't even using AI widely, human beings have to go in and approve those labels. Human beings need to go in and evaluate those labels. And then another set of human beings have to then go and validate your work. And what was amazing to me was how many layers of human intervention that one picture had gone through. Yet these logics of eugenics, this idea that Black people are not people, this idea that we are animals, was allowed to be released into, and again, I'm on a decolonial podcast using colonial language, but we were referring to it as being released into the wild. And anthropologists will know that that's not a great way to speak about the habitat of people's civilizations. And so I just was very naive because I am a lover of technology and I was definitely a tech optimist at that point. And I just thought that they had made a mistake. So we wrote this report and we were like, we can teach people how not to be racist. Then there will be no racism in technology. And what it did was catch the imagination of a number of funders here in the US, the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation being the first two to hop on, along with Craig Newmark Philanthropies. And they said, we will give you 2 years to work on this project. Technology and race seems very interesting. It's not something that we're talking about. And that's where AI for the People was born. And very quickly, my thing is I would rather start something off well than try and fix it. And as we were looking at automating processes, increasing processing speed, and through AI, I wanted to create an organization where we would be in policy discussions at the ground floor, whether that's public policy, so the work that we had done in the US Congress, advocating for what we called the Algorithmic Accountability Act, which was basically this idea that we took from human rights law that AI systems should present impact assessment. And what that means is you test to see whether these machines work on traditionally marginalized groups. So do they work well for women? Do they work well for language minorities, for gender, gender minority, people on the gender spectrum, people who are racialized and specifically Black, because across the world, those of us who have Black skin are always the most discriminated against in whatever society we find ourselves. And we, again, naively, I was like, this is America. Of course they're going to want to do this. But America is also a country that was founded, and our economy and the British economies also, the Industrial Revolution was founded on chattel slavery. So this idea of having a liberatory frame where we don't exploit people with Black skin is very challenging to the histories of the countries that we were trying to change through this policy advocacy. But we were really well received. So over the last 5 years almost, we've definitely changed. We started out being really passionate about education. We then moved into really thinking about how we could inform the way companies worked. So we sit behind NDA and we speak to various companies about their data sets and how they can make them more representative. We have been given opportunities to engage with the UN in some of their as advisors. And now the reason that I came to Cambridge was, and the reason that we've looked at really having somebody at the PhD level is that we want to start producing empirical research that really helps us advance, because prior we were looking at the research of others and using that as tools to advocate, but there isn't enough funding in this kind of anti-racist decolonial space. And so we need to start training people to do that work. And I am very privileged to be a Harding postgraduate fellow at Cambridge, which basically means that my fees are paid for and I'm given research grant money to do this work. So I'm hoping that we can unlock funds, not just for ourselves, but across this whole decolonial space, because we need the knowledge so that we can continue to develop better policies as we are in this. I always call it the messy. We're kind of in labor, and it's messy and it's painful, but hopefully we can birth a really beautiful child.
Brilliant. I guess sort of for one of the things that I'm curious about, in particularly in engaging with companies, right, is this the tension in a way, right? Because, okay, companies on one level, I guess, want to do good, right? Or at least individuals within companies want to do good, I guess some of them. But at the same time, it's just that conflict, right, tends to sell. And of course, in racism, that's a level of conflict, sort of a hatred sells, right? And conflict sells. And you mentioned the Ku Klux Klan being very early adopters of these technologies, which I thought was striking. I didn't know that. So I'm wondering, is there a place in which this is really a part of racial capitalism, and any solution needs to be much more structural? To what degree can engaging with policymakers and companies within the current framework make a difference? And to what degree can it perhaps not? And what else would need to be done then?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it actually makes us quite controversial in our field, certainly in the US, because you have really giants of our field, the Sophia Nobles, Algorithms of Oppression, Timnit Gebru, formerly of Google, who will never engage with companies because they're coming from this Audre Lorde idea of that you cannot use the master's tool to undo the master's house. And I think that there is, I respect that, but I think where we situate ourselves is as pragmatists. We sit in a country, the United States, that aside from China, has the largest investment into research and development in AI technology. We have US-based companies that are spread across the world. And without the EU, honestly, they would be running wild. I think the EU has given us real hope, given people like me real hope and models that we could potentially follow. But Congress is dysfunctional. We are, in the United States, really constantly being asked in our elections, do we want to fall into fascism or authoritarianism? Or do you want this very kind of corporate liberal alternative? And I definitely know where I sit on that question, but it's a very extreme question. And it really speaks to this huge splintering of our population and crisis of our values that means that public policy, although that will be the structural fix, we have a dysfunctional political system. Companies, on the other hand, are bigger than governments. They're more powerful than governments, and they're richer than governments. Any change that can be made through changing company policy would change the experience of AI technologies for the most marginalized almost immediately. And within those companies, there are pockets of people that are trying to do this work. Our question and what we don't understand is how powerful are those groups and how powerful are those voices within companies. But even, I've already critiqued Google, but even looking at Google and the work that they did to answer Joy Buolamwini's paper, Gender Shades, where they said, okay, computer vision doesn't recognize dark skin. We're going to work with Black sociologists at Harvard, and we're going to create a better computer vision technology. And they did. They used the Monk scale. They integrated it into their Android. The reason that that's significant is that much of the global majority are Android users. They're not iPhone users. And so suddenly you have these telephones that are being marketed across the Black and brown world that are more effective at picking up skin colors. So that's an example where a critical paper outside of industry leads to research and development within industry that leads to a much better product, which then becomes a bestseller. But there are also voices within that company who are talking about share price, talking about how we don't want to sacrifice share price. I'm thinking of Amazon as being an example of that. Amazon, over the last 30 years, have had a 31% annualized rate of return for shareholders. And Amazon have been able to do that while commercializing facial recognition technology to police forces, crushing labor, and introducing algorithmic management that crushes really the least amongst us. They've been able to do, so Amazon has done all of these things that are net bad, but if you're a shareholder, they have also created huge wealth. And it's difficult, even within Amazon, where they have these teams that are trying to do good, but 31% annualized interest, you do get into the logics of racial capitalism. And you do realize that 31% annualized interest rates has literally come off the backs of the racialized, of the marginalized section, people that suffer from sexism, gender minorities. And so to your question, is this effective? No, it's not 100% effective, but it's better than what we have in policy in the US. It provides us a voice. And one of the things that AI for the people has actually moved into is that we want to become shareholders in companies that we want to influence so that we can become proxy voters. And we can, from the investment floor, let them know that this isn't acceptable. None of these fixes that I am describing to you will solve the problem. But what they do is that they create a stake and it invites other people into this field to join us. I think on top of this, we need movements. I don't think groups like AI for the People who position themselves as insiders, as critical friends, as poking people. I was recently in a meeting at the White House where I was really poking the Biden administration to say you need to be funding what we would call in the UK decolonial approaches to AI more. You need to fund those scholars because their work matters. And I was giving examples. But we're in the room. We also need people who are going to lead movements. We need people who are going to lead boycotts so that we can get a mass movement. And in the United States, we need more money out of politics so that the voice of the people is louder, and it really is one person, one vote.
Yeah. So I think there are a lot of things going on there, but I would like to touch particularly on one point, being a very ardent EU supporter. So I'll just catch on that. And if you could say something great about what the EU do, and actually I happen to be from Denmark, and I've heard something about there was a former Danish minister that worked in the EU as well. So if you happen to talk about that would I wouldn't mind.
Well, I don't know enough about Danish politics, but I do know that I'm very in love with Nordic countries right now, just because of the work that female members of those legislative houses are doing supporting American women as we lose our rights to abortion and other bodily autonomy. So I'm already happy with those countries. But what I'll say is, for example, I was asked to give commentary on deepfake technology and how the US Congress could be thinking about regulating that. And it was so helpful to be able to say to them, look at what the EU AI Act says on this. Look at the protections that they put in. Look at the labeling that they're asking these companies to already do. So if we know that they're doing business in the EU, we know that this can be done. So if they're having to do it in the EU and really allow for this kind of Brussels creep, I think it's called, where policy in one part of the world influences policy in the other part of the world. And look at these EU lawmakers and look at the ways that they are forcing these companies to behave. We need to figure out a way of doing that in the US. And as a British person, I cannot believe I'm saying this because I don't agree with this, but one of the great things about the UK leaving the European Union is that they're a low regulation environment. And even they're taking on EU laws and EU standards around AI because they're beginning to realize that in breaking away, they left themselves vulnerable. And that also really helps on the US side, because while the US doesn't see itself reflected in the way that the EU is constructed, because it's many different countries, it's, kind of this coalition, this federation, it does really align itself with the UK because of their joint histories, co-collaboration with transatlantic slavery, et cetera, et cetera. And it provides us with a tool to then go and advocate. And I, for one, am very grateful for that.
Okay, yeah, I think I like this concept of Brussels creep. I've never heard that before, but I'll get it down in my, I'll remember that. We've covered quite a lot, and I'm just trying to let everything sink in. I think at this point, I don't immediately actually have any more questions, but what I would like, perhaps if you would like just to take 2 minutes to just say a little bit more about AI for the people, any way that people can engage with AI for the people, et cetera, et cetera.
AI for the people is really, we're at an interesting juncture because we were a 2-year project and we're now turning into an organization. We are coming up to our 5th year. We launched in March 2020 thinking that we would be doing all of this work in DC and we would be flying to Brussels and we would be traveling. And then when COVID came, we were like, oh, good, we have 2 weeks off and we'll get back in April. And so very quickly we had to realize that we were going to have to find ways of advocating differently. So we did a lot of kind of arts-based work initially, but I think where our sweet spot is and where I see us going is really in report writing and presenting at conferences. So one of the ways that the academic community can get engaged really early is through collaborators. If people are interested in writing reports, the 2 that we have coming up are, I'm looking at AI in the future of work. And I'm specifically really looking at the future of Black workers and trying to take a very holistic view. So everything from algorithmic management on one end and what that means, down to where are data centers, what does that mean from an environmental justice perspective, who lives in those areas, down to the startup economy and what does it mean not to be funded? Because here in the US, we're also having legal challenges towards those startups being funded. So anybody that is interested in, and I'm a sociologist, so definitely how work is constructed, losing jobs, who's losing their jobs. Another research project, which aligns more with my PhD work, is looking at the ways in which toxic ideologies travel online through what's called cloaked speech. So Jessie Daniels, who I spoke about, cyber racism, one of the key concepts in her book is the Ku Klux Klan were able to disguise their white supremacist activity by making it seem very innocuous. And they bought the domain names for all of these websites and then used them for propaganda. So a really famous one is martinlutherking.org, which you would assume would be a civil rights site. But if you actually go to that site, it has chapters from David Dukes, who is the Grand Wizard of the KKK. Basically, it's extremely anti-Semitic. It speaks about King in terms of being a terrorist. But if you are going there to consume it and you are of the mindset that the internet tells the truth, that can then bring people down a rabbit hole, because then your algorithmic recommendation systems are now going to feed you more extremist content. And that can have a radicalizing effect. So I'm really interested in the way anti-female sentiment. My hypothesis is when you start to see attacks on women's rights, that's a marker of an anti-democratic regime. So again, attacks on abortion in the US, that was brought under what I think the history books are going to be calling a period of American fascism. Ultimately, maybe not in our generation, but I think 100 years from now, people will write the Trump administration in that way. And if people are interested in gender, if people are interested in democracy, if people are interested in rhetoric, we would love to write with you. We would love to read with you. We would love to think about this comparatively. I'm an Americanist. My master's is in American studies, but I don't know what it's like in the global majority. I don't know what it's like in Northern Europe. I don't know. So that's one way. The other way, we're now thinking about convening. I just got to Cambridge and I hope I don't get thrown out from Cambridge, having been there 1 week after saying this. But I have great plans for my department and inviting people to workshops, thinking about reading groups. That's something that we really like. And then I would say the third way people can get involved is that if you live in a country like Brazil or Kenya or Denmark, where you have better laws, just talking to us, because we're looking for inspiration. And honestly, we're looking for hope, because to the point around racial capitalism, that is the fight that we're fighting. It's not about one technology or another. It's really about how do we dissuade people from taking advantage of this 31% annualized interest rates. And I didn't say before, that's over the last 30 years.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. Yeah.
A lot of money.
Okay, so on that note, I'd like to thank you very much again for participating. And I'm sure, I hope certainly to continue contact and maybe even go to Cambridge for a workshop at some point. That would be really cool.
I would love that. Consider the invitation open. I just need to figure my way around, but certainly 2025, 2026 school year, I would love to have that conversation with colleagues.